Beneath 300 feet of black water in a steel tomb slowly flooding with seawater and poisonous gas, 87 men faced a choice that no human being should ever have to make. They could stay and suffocate in the darkness, or they could attempt an escape that would almost certainly kill them. The submarine USS Tang, one of the deadliest hunters in the Pacific War, had just been destroyed by her own torpedo. The weapon had malfunctioned, turned in a wide circle, and struck the vessel that fired it. Now Commander Richard O'Kane and the survivors trapped inside the forward torpedo room had perhaps 2 hours before the air turned lethal. Above them, Japanese destroyers prowled the surface, dropping depth charges that shook the disabled submarine like a toy. What happened in those final hours would become one of the most harrowing survival stories in naval history. USS Tang was commissioned on October 15, 1943, at Mare Island Naval Shipyard in California. She was a Ballot-class fleet submarine, 211 feet long, carrying 24 torpedoes and a crew of 88 men. On paper, she was identical to dozens of other submarines built during the war. But what made Tang exceptional was the man who commanded her. Commander Richard Hetherington O'Kane was 33 years old when he took command of Tang. He was a graduate of the United States Naval Academy, quiet and intense, methodical in planning but aggressive in execution. He had served as executive officer aboard USS Wahoo under Commander Dudley Morton, one of the most famous submarine skippers of the war, and had absorbed Morton's philosophy of relentless attack. O'Kane believed that submarines were killers, and their purpose was to sink enemy ships. Under his command, Tang would become the most successful American submarine per patrol in the war. From her first patrol in January 1944, Tang demonstrated extraordinary lethality. O'Kane hunted with precision and patience. He understood that submarine warfare was about geometry, timing, nerve, and an almost preternatural ability to read the movements of enemy ships in the dark. He would study convoy patterns for hours, calculating intercept courses, positioning Tang at the perfect angle, and then striking with devastating accuracy. In her first patrol off the Caroline Islands, she sank 5 ships. In her second patrol near the Palau Islands, she destroyed 2 more. In her third patrol off the coast of Japan, she sank 10 vessels in a single month. By September 1944, Tang had destroyed 33 Japanese ships totaling more than 116,000 tons, a record that placed her among the elite submarines of the Pacific Fleet. The men who served aboard Tang were mechanics and electricians, torpedomen and sonar operators, young men from small towns across America who had volunteered for submarine duty. Life aboard a submarine was an exercise in endurance. The interior was cramped beyond imagination. Men slept in bunks stacked 3 high, hot bunking in shifts. The air was thick and stale. Carbon dioxide levels rose gradually as the crew breathed and machinery consumed oxygen. Privacy did not exist. Men lived in constant proximity, their lives exposed to the scrutiny of their crewmates. But submarine service paid extra, and submariners wore silver dolphins on their uniforms with quiet pride. They also accepted risks that few other servicemen faced. If a submarine was hit, there was often no time to abandon ship. The ocean did not forgive mistakes. By October 1944, the Pacific War had entered a new phase. American forces had recaptured the Philippines and destroyed much of the Japanese Navy at the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Japanese shipping was being strangled. Convoys moved at night under heavy escort. Finding targets required patience. Sinking them required nerve. Commander O'Kane understood this. He also understood that the Mark 18 electric torpedo, which Tang carried on this patrol, represented both an advantage and a risk. The Mark 18 was electric, ran on batteries, left no wake, and was nearly invisible beneath the surface. For night attacks, when stealth mattered more than speed, it was an ideal weapon. But electric torpedoes had their own vulnerabilities. The gyro mechanisms that controlled their course were delicate. If a gyro failed or malfunctioned, the torpedo could veer off course. In rare cases, it could turn in a circle and run back toward the submarine that fired it. This phenomenon, known as a circular run, was uncommon but not unheard of. Submarine crews were trained to listen for erratic propeller sounds after launch and to dive immediately if a torpedo seemed to be returning. But in the chaos of a night surface attack, detecting a circular run was not always possible. Tang departed Pearl Harbor on September 24, 1944, bound for the Formosa Strait, the body of water separating Taiwan from mainland China. It was one of the most dangerous patrol areas in the Pacific. Japanese convoys moved through the strait carrying troops, fuel, ammunition, and supplies. The waters were shallow, mined, and heavily patrolled. O'Kane knew the risks. He also knew that the targets would be rich. The early weeks of the patrol were extraordinarily successful. On October 10th, Tang sank 2 cargo ships and damaged a third. On October 11th, she sank a transport and a tanker. On October 23rd, she destroyed a passenger cargo vessel and a freighter in a daring daylight attack. O'Kane was hunting with an aggression that bordered on recklessness, maneuvering Tang into positions that left little margin for error, firing torpedoes at targets barely 1,000 yards away, then diving to evade counterattacks. His crew trusted him completely. They had survived 4 previous patrols under his command and believed that he could bring them through anything. But even the best commanders are subject to the laws of probability. On the night of October 25, 1944, Tang had been tracking a convoy since dusk. The convoy consisted of 3 cargo ships and several escorts, moving slowly northward through the Formosa Strait. O'Kane decided to attack on the surface, under cover of darkness, using Tang's speed and maneuverability to close the distance and fire torpedoes at short range. Surface attacks were more dangerous because the submarine was visible and vulnerable to ramming or gunfire, but they allowed for greater speed and better visibility. O'Kane had executed dozens of surface attacks before. He was confident. At approximately 2 o'clock in the morning on October 25th, Tang fired her first torpedo at the leading cargo ship. The weapon ran true. Seconds later, a second torpedo followed, then a third. The first torpedo struck the cargo ship amidships, detonating with a massive explosion. The second torpedo hit moments later, breaking the ship's back. The vessel began to sink immediately. The convoy erupted into chaos. Escort ships turned toward Tang, searchlights sweeping the water, guns firing blindly into the darkness. O'Kane maneuvered Tang at high speed, repositioning for another attack. She fired 2 more torpedoes at the second cargo ship. Both struck home. The target exploded, burning fiercely. O'Kane pressed the attack. Tang moved closer to the third cargo ship, a large transport vessel silhouetted against the flames. The forward torpedo tubes were empty now. O'Kane ordered the boat turned to bring the stern tubes to bear. Tang swung around. The transport was less than 1,000 yards away. O'Kane gave the order to fire. The 23rd torpedo of the patrol launched from Tang's stern tube at approximately 2:15 in the morning. It was the final Mark 18 in Tang's magazine. For a few seconds, everything seemed normal. The torpedo cleared the tube, its electric motor humming as it accelerated away. But instead of running straight toward the target, the torpedo broached to the surface 20 seconds after launch. Its propeller broke through the water, thrashing violently. And then, instead of continuing on its intended course, the torpedo began to turn. The gyro had malfunctioned. The weapon was executing a circular run. Commander O'Kane saw it immediately. From his position on the bridge, he could see the phosphorescent wake of the torpedo curving back toward Tang. He shouted orders to the helm, all ahead emergency. Right full rudder. Tang's diesels roared to maximum power. The submarine surged forward, turning hard to starboard, trying desperately to outrun the weapon she had just fired. But the torpedo was faster. It was closing the distance at 40 knots. Tang was moving at 20 knots. The mathematics were simple and unforgiving. There was not enough time. O'Kane ordered the crew to brace for impact. Men grabbed stanchions, bulkheads, anything solid. In the engine rooms, the crew could hear the high-pitched whine of the torpedo's propeller growing louder, closer. And then, at 2:16 in the morning, the torpedo struck USS Tang in the stern, just aft of the maneuvering room, detonating with a force that ripped through the aft torpedo room, the engine rooms, and the maneuvering compartment. The explosion was catastrophic. The stern was blown open. Water poured into the shattered compartments. Men were killed instantly by the blast or crushed by collapsing machinery. The lights went out. The submarine began to sink stern first, her bow rising into the air. On the bridge, Commander O'Kane and 8 other men were thrown into the water by the force of the explosion. They could see Tang going down beneath them, her bow rising higher, angled steeply. And then Tang slipped beneath the surface, stern first, taking 78 men with her. She settled on the bottom at a depth of approximately 180 feet, listing to port. Her aft compartments flooded and crushed, her forward compartments still intact but rapidly becoming unlivable. Inside Tang, in the forward torpedo room and the forward battery compartment, 30 men were still alive. They were trapped. The hatches were sealed. The escape trunk was the only way out, but using it required calm training and equipment that had never been tested under real combat conditions. The air inside the submarine was already thick and foul. The temperature was rising. The humidity was unbearable. Men stripped off their shirts, gasping for breath. Outside, they could hear the rumble of depth charges as Japanese destroyers hunted for survivors. The depth charges were not carefully aimed. The destroyers were dropping charges in a pattern, hoping to damage or destroy whatever remained of the submarine. Each explosion sent a shockwave that hammered against Tang's hull, shaking the boat violently. The men inside could feel the concussions in their chests. They did not know if the next charge would breach the hull and kill them all instantly. They did not know if the hull could withstand the punishment. All they knew was that they were trapped at the bottom of the ocean. The air was running out, and their only chance of survival was to escape into water that was 18 stories deep. The escape procedure was theoretically simple. A man would enter the escape trunk, a small cylindrical chamber just large enough for one person. The lower hatch would be sealed. The trunk would be flooded with seawater until the pressure inside equalized with the pressure outside. Then the upper hatch would be opened, and the man would swim to the surface, exhaling continuously to prevent his lungs from rupturing. The Malfunction lung, a rubber breathing bag worn around the neck, would provide a small reserve of oxygen during the ascent. In training, men practiced this procedure in controlled conditions, in shallow water. But this was 180 feet of dark water, with enemy ships overhead, with men exhausted and terrified. And the Malfunction lung had never been used successfully from a depth greater than 100 feet. The senior officer in the forward compartment was Lieutenant Commander Floyd Caverly. He organized the escape attempt with a calmness that defied the circumstances. He divided the men into groups. He explained the procedure step by step. He emphasized the importance of exhaling during ascent. And then he asked for volunteers to go first. Several men stepped forward immediately. They understood that the first men through the trunk would have the best chance. The air was deteriorating rapidly. The longer they waited, the weaker they would become. The first man entered the trunk. The lower hatch was sealed. Water began flooding into the chamber, cold and black, rising around his body. He adjusted the Momsen lung, checked the mouthpiece, took a breath. The water reached the top of the trunk. The pressure equalized. The upper hatch opened, and the man pushed himself out into the open ocean, 180 feet below the surface, and began to swim upward. The ascent was an ordeal beyond description. The water was completely dark. There was no sense of direction except the faint pull of buoyancy. The Momsen lung provided barely enough air. The man had to fight the instinct to hold his breath, had to force himself to exhale constantly as the pressure decreased. His lungs burned, his ears throbbed, his vision narrowed. And then, after what seemed like an eternity, his head broke the surface. He gasped for air, treading water, disoriented and exhausted. Around him, debris from the convoy floated on the water. And then he saw the shape of a Japanese destroyer moving toward him. One by one, the men in the forward torpedo room attempted the escape. Some made it to the surface, others did not. Some panicked halfway up and drowned. Some held their breath instead of exhaling and suffered pulmonary barotrauma, their lungs rupturing from the expanding air. Some simply ran out of strength and sank back into the darkness. The escape trunk operated in a terrible rhythm. A man would enter. The trunk would flood. The hatch would open. Minutes would pass. And then the trunk would be drained, and another man would enter. As the hours passed, conditions inside Tang became unbearable. The carbon dioxide levels rose to toxic concentrations. Men became confused, lethargic, unable to think clearly. The battery compartment began to leak seawater into the battery cells, producing chlorine gas, a deadly poison that seared the lungs. The temperature climbed above 100 degrees. Men were vomiting from the heat and the foul air. Some begged to be allowed into the escape trunk immediately. Others sat quietly, resigned to their fate. By dawn, 13 men had escaped from Tang. 8 had reached the surface alive. 5 had died during the ascent. 30 more men remained inside, and many of them were too weak to attempt escape. The air was nearly unbreathable. The chlorine gas was spreading. Lieutenant Commander Caverly made the decision to accelerate the escape attempts. Some men refused. They knew they did not have the strength. They chose to remain inside, to die with the boat rather than drown halfway to the surface. In total, 15 men escaped from USS Tang. 5 died during the ascent. 10 reached the surface alive. They floated among the debris, clinging to wreckage, watching Japanese destroyers circle the area. One by one, the exhausted Americans were pulled from the water by Japanese sailors. They were beaten immediately, struck with fists and rifle butts by merchant sailors who had lost comrades in Tang's attacks. The submariners were too weak to resist. Commander O'Kane was among the survivors. He had been on the bridge when the torpedo struck, had been thrown clear by the explosion, had managed to stay afloat through the night. He was barely conscious when the Japanese found him. They beat him savagely. When they discovered his identity, the beatings intensified. He was kicked, punched, struck with clubs. His ribs were broken. His face was swollen beyond recognition. But he remained conscious, silent, enduring the brutality with stoicism. The 9 surviving crew members of Tang were transported to Japan and imprisoned in the Ofuna Interrogation Center, a secret facility where captured submariners were held for intelligence purposes. Ofuna was not officially recognized as a prisoner of war camp. It operated outside the Geneva Conventions. The men held there were not registered with the Red Cross. The conditions were deliberately harsh. Prisoners were kept in small cells, fed starvation rations, denied medical care, and subjected to constant interrogation. Commander O'Kane and his men resisted. They gave only name, rank, and serial number. They refused to provide intelligence. The interrogators responded with brutality. O'Kane was beaten repeatedly, denied food, kept in solitary confinement. He developed dysentery. He lost more than 50 pounds, but he did not break. In December 1944, the survivors were transferred to Omori prisoner-of-war camp near Tokyo. Conditions were only marginally better. The prisoners were forced to work in factories, performing manual labor 12 hours a day on near-starvation rations. They were beaten by guards for minor infractions. They suffered from malnutrition, disease, and cold. Winter in Japan was brutal, and the prisoners had only thin cotton uniforms and unheated barracks. The war ended in August 1945. On August 6th, the United States dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. On August 9th, a second bomb destroyed Nagasaki. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. The prisoners in Omori could hardly believe it. And then American aircraft appeared overhead, dropping supplies, and the guards abandoned the camp, and the prisoners realized they were free. Commander O'Kane and the 8 surviving crew members of USS Tang were liberated on August 29, 1945. They were emaciated, sick, traumatized by 10 months of captivity and the memories of what had happened to Tang. Kane was awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions during Tang's 5th War Patrol, for his leadership, his courage, and his refusal to surrender. The citation praised his skill in sinking Japanese ships and his bravery in the face of enemy fire, but it said nothing about the circular run, nothing about the malfunction that destroyed his boat, nothing about the 78 men who died. The loss of USS Tang was a tragedy compounded by irony. She was sunk not by enemy action but by her own weapon. The circular run was a random malfunction, a mechanical failure that could not have been predicted or prevented. No one was at fault. Commander O'Kane had done everything correctly. The torpedo crew had loaded and fired the weapon according to procedure. The gyro had simply failed, and that failure killed 78 men and destroyed one of the most successful submarines in the Pacific Fleet. The legacy of USS Tang is complex. She was the most successful American submarine per patrol in World War II, a vessel whose combat record remains unmatched. She sank 33 Japanese ships and demonstrated the lethal effectiveness of submarine warfare. But she is also remembered for the manner of her loss, for the cruel irony of being destroyed by her own weapon, for the suffering of the men trapped inside her flooded compartments, for the harrowing escape attempts and the months of captivity that followed. USS Tang remains on the bottom of the Formosa Strait, 180 feet below the surface, her hull corroded by decades of seawater. She is a grave, a memorial, a relic of a war fought long ago. The Navy has designated the site as a war grave, protected from disturbance. No one may enter Tang. She belongs to the men who died aboard her. Commander Richard O'Kane retired from the Navy in 1957 with the rank of Rear Admiral. He passed away in 1994 at the age of 83. The crew of USS Tang deserves to be remembered not only for their achievements but for their sacrifice. They won a war in a weapon that could kill them as easily as it could kill the enemy. They accepted that risk, and when the disaster came, they faced it with courage that transcended circumstance. If you found this story moving, please consider subscribing to this channel for more in-depth historical narratives. If you appreciated the research and storytelling, a like would mean a great deal. And now I want to hear from you. What struck you most about the story of USS Tang? Was it the tragic irony of being sunk by her own torpedo? The harrowing escape attempts from 180 feet below the surface? The resilience of the survivors through months of captivity? Share your thoughts in the comments below.